The Architectural Heritage Center's artifact collection began as the personal collection of our founders, Jerry Bosco, who started collecting as a teenager in the 1950s, and Ben Milligan. Between the 1950s and the 1980s, they collected pieces from buildings all over the Portland area, from around the region, and even across the country. And then over the ensuing years, we've also added additional artifacts from other donors. The AHC has a collection now of more than 200 art glass windows that include stained glass and leaded glass windows of all shapes and sizes, stored here at the center. This stained glass window was purchased in 1955 by Jerry Bosco from the Lloyd Corporation as they were getting ready to build the Lloyd Center Mall in Northeast Portland. The window was in a house that was built back in the 1890s, but by the early 1950s was actually in use as the Battleship Oregon Museum.
The Battleship Oregon was one of 3 first-generation U.S. battleships that were launched in 1893, and it was the only one of the 3 that was built on the West Coast, which made it a really big deal for Oregonians in particular because the ship was named after them. It was launched from the West Coast. So in 1898, when the war with Spain was starting, the U.S. Navy ordered the ship to sail around Cape Horn. So it was able to be there for the Battle of Santiago, and this was followed very closely in the national press. And it did so well in the battle that it was world famous. The Battleship Oregon was preserved due to people all over the country mobilizing to find it a home. The curator of the Battleship Oregon Museum, who was also the secretary, was Cora A. Thompson, and she was able to pass a resolution at one of the national conventions of the United Spanish War Veterans to make the ship the main repository of Spanish-American War and Philippine-American War history. So she got people donating their belongings from all over the country to build the collection of this museum. The War Production Board reclaimed the Battleship Oregon to use as scrap in 1943, and the museum collection had to move off the ship. The Oregon Museum Foundation, Inc. owned this house in the Lloyd District that had been damaged in an earthquake in 1949. So the Battleship Oregon Museum collection was able to move into that home.
Researching the AHC's artifact collection is an ongoing process as we try to find the history and the stories behind the pieces in our collection. Bosco and Milligan kept very interesting records, and for a long time we weren't able to identify where this window came from. We discovered on their collection of 3x5 note cards that we found that Jerry had made notes about when he purchased it, and this was true for a lot of the collection, including stained glass windows and some other artifacts, that they actually just kept all of their records on 3x5 note cards. Most recently, for the past few years, we've been working with a volunteer to help us identify the art glass artisans from the late 19th and early 20th century who made some of the beautiful stained glass windows, not only in our collection, but also in the buildings that are still standing around the Portland area.